welcome back to Biblical Greek Made Easy. This is class 10 of Module 1. And guys, this is the last class of Module 1. After today, you'll be able to say that you've completed the Greek system, the Greek nouns that we learn here in Module 1. You've learned adjectives, you've learned pronouns. You've come a long way. I'm super proud of you. I'm super excited for your Greek journey. Module 2 is all about verbs, and the Greek verbal system introduces you to that. Make sure you continue on because that's essential to be able to read and translate New Testament Greek. But guys, give yourselves a hand. You've come a long way. I'm so proud of you. 2 Timothy 1:7 says, "For God gave us a spirit, not of fear, but of power and love and self-control." Okay? And maybe you had some fear when you started learning Greek. When you came into learning a new language, maybe there was some anxiety, some fear on the front end, but you mastered that, you kept going, you pushed through it, and you've embraced that spirit of power that the Lord gives us. And so I'm excited for you about that. And here's the tip of the day, okay? The tip of the day is that we're going to use accent marks as hints. Okay, use accent marks as hints. That's the tip of the day, and you're going to see what I mean coming up. Okay, we've not stressed accent marks. Most Greek teachers don't early on, because it's unnecessary to memorize all of the difficulties and the minutia of accent marks early on. But there are a few that matter, and to the degree that it helps us, to the degree that it makes biblical Greek easy for us, we're going to use them as hints, and that's what we're going to talk about today. All right? So today we're talking about the relative pronoun, and let's talk about why this matters. Well, the New Testament contains 1,365 occurrences of the relative pronoun. Okay, that is a lot, okay? You need to be able to recognize and translate and deal with the relative pronoun on its terms in order to read and translate the New Testament well. And so that's going to be really important. This is one of those, it's another tool in your tool belt, so to speak, that can help you engage with the New Testament Greek. It's also one of the least understood parts of speech in English, okay? Most people don't understand and aren't able to grasp relative pronouns in English. Even though we use them all the time, they don't fully understand how they're used. And so we're going to learn how to use them in English because it's going to help us with our Greek and vice versa, okay? Have you ever noticed this before? Have you ever been learning a different language and learning that other language actually helped you speak English better, helped you get better at English grammar? And so that's one of the benefits of learning a different language. And we're going to do that with relative pronouns today. So let's get right into it. Let's do another grade school English review. So relative pronouns in English are these words. It's who, whom, which, that, and whose. Whose being the possessive of the relative pronoun. Who, whom, which, that, and whose. Okay? And a relative pronoun is one which is used to refer to a noun or nouns mentioned previously. So it's going to point back to something earlier in the sentence, or maybe earlier in a previous sentence, earlier in the paragraph, that sort of thing. Okay? Now, a couple notes, and this is kind of what can make relative pronouns confusing, particularly in English, because these words in English, who and that and words like that, they have a wider range than just relative pronouns in English, okay? That's not true in Greek, but in English they're a little bit complex. So the word who, for example, that we're talking about as a relative pronoun, is not the interrogative who, like who's going to make me a sandwich, that sort of thing. That's not what we're talking about. That's a different word. Even though it's the same word, it's a different kind of word in English. That word who can do a couple different things in English. That's not true in Greek. Remember, we learned the interrogative pronoun in Greek, which is tis with the accent mark, okay? That means who or why or what, okay? That's the interrogative pronoun. And note that the that we're talking about here as a relative pronoun is not a kainos, okay? A kainos was the demonstrative pronoun we talked about previously, like that guy, that person, that sandwich, that lunch, that meal. Can you tell I'm a little hungry? I'm using a lot of food analogies today. But that's a kainos. That's the that we learned before. So we don't want to get those confused. Remember, in English, there's some confusion there. In Greek, they're completely different words. Okay, so we need to be aware of that. Okay, so a couple examples. The student that mastered Greek. Notice the that there is referring to the student that just came right before it, right? That's a relative pronoun, okay? We're not saying that student, that would be the demonstrative pronoun. We're saying the student that mastered Greek. Or the professor who ran the Tough Mudder. The who there is the relative pronoun usage. We're not saying who is the professor who ran the Tough Mudder, right? The who at the beginning of the sentence in that example would be the interrogative pronoun. The one in the slide that you're looking at here, the who there, that's a relative pronoun, okay? And guys, that's the most confusing thing about relative pronouns is just understanding how they work in English, okay? And differentiating them from the interrogative pronoun and the demonstrative pronoun, okay? So we got to get those straight in our minds. Now notice that the relative pronoun usually introduces a clause that modifies a noun. And so we must view that relative clause as a unit, okay? It's maybe a bit of an offshoot in the sentence, and we'll see an example of that here in a minute. So for example, here, look at this example. I am going to fail the student who roots against the Rams. Okay. Now notice here, the who roots against the Rams, that whole thing there is the relative clause. Okay. And so it's almost like its own mini sentence because notice it's got the student who roots against the Rams. It's got its own verb. It's got like a new subject in there. That's not the main verb of the sentence. It's not the main subject of the sentence. Okay. I am the main subject of the sentence and am is the main verb. So just notice that we have this clause that's sort of playing by its own rules that isn't bound by the rest of the sentence, subject, main verb, direct object, etc. Okay, so we just really want to notice those relative clauses and deal with them on their own terms. Does that make sense? Okay. So let's do a little offshoot here, a little diatribe of our own, and talk about who versus whom. Okay. In English, this is one of the most misunderstood elements in English grammar. When do you use who and when do you use whom? Okay. And you know enough Greek here for me to use Greek terms to explain it to you, and I think it'll make a lot more sense. So let's go ahead and look at this. So the word who is used when the word is the subject of a sentence. In other words, the nominative. Okay. That's when you use who. If it's talking about a nominative subject. Now, you'd never use the word nominative probably before you learned Greek. But when I say who is the nominative, that makes sense to you now, doesn't it? Okay? And that's just another example of Greek helping us with our English. Whom, with the M on the end, is going to be used when the word is the object, either direct or indirect, of the verb or the preposition that's in the sentence. Okay? And so using the Greek language, we would say in the dative or in the accusative, we're going to use whom. That's how it works. That's the difference between who and whom in English, is that who is the nominative, whom is the object, either the dative or the accusative, okay? Back in the day, English used to have cases that they used, and that's almost completely gone from the English language, but this is a place where it does stay here in these pronouns. And we've actually seen that before with personal pronouns too. I versus me versus my. Those are all cases, right? Different words to do different functions in the sentence from a pronoun perspective. Who and whom is an example of that too. So look at a couple examples. The guy who ate my sandwich is foolish. Notice that who there is referring to it's talking about the guy who ate, so it's a subject. It's in the nominative because it's before the verb in English. It's the subject kind of idea, okay? And then notice the second example. To whom did you give my sandwich? To whom? Obviously, that is a dative idea. It's an indirect object, so we're going to use whom. Guys, that's how you use who and whom in English. Hopefully those words help you a little bit. Now, what I want to do now is going back to Greek for a little bit. I want to show you the paradigm for the relative pronoun. It's going to look kind of big and scary, but hold off for a second. I'm going to give you a neat little trick. This is Biblical Greek made easy, so I want to help you master this and understand this with as little amount of mental energy as possible. And that's what I'm going to do next. So here is the paradigm of the relative pronoun. Okay? I'll just let you look at that for a minute. Look at it. Has, hu, ho, han, going down the masculine column there. And then hoi, hon, hois, hus. The feminine he, heis, he, hain, etc. Does that look like anything you've seen before? Yeah, you may notice that it looks pretty similar to the definite article endings, but there's something missing on the front, isn't there? Okay, now let me put up the definite article right next to it. And there's a few places that are different, like the nominative masculine singular, for example. But if you look down that list, notice the genitive singular, for example, who versus to in the definite article. The dative is ho versus to. The accusative is han versus tan. You notice how the tau essentially just became a rough breathing mark? Okay? And notice that every single relative pronoun form has a rough breathing mark. Comparatively, there's only 4 that have rough breathing marks on the definite article side. Okay? So guys, here's the trick. Here's the trick to make this easy for you. This is the shortcut. This is the cheat code to help you with Greek relative pronouns. Okay? If you encounter a short word that looks like a definite article, but has a rough breathing mark over it, and the accents just look a little bit different, right? So for example, look at the neuter nominative or accusative singular. Notice how it's ha, just like we see nominative masculine singular. We see ha there, but notice there's that extra accent mark over it. It just looks weird. You've seen nominative masculine singular definite article so many times that when you see it with the extra accent on it, it just looks weird. And so I had a student one time, her name was Taylor, one of my best Greek students I ever had. We were talking about this, and she goes, but there's a goober over top of that word. And so that sort of became our shorthand. Anytime we'd be translating the New Testament, we'd come to a relative pronoun, she'd go, is that a goober? And that became our joke for relative pronouns. We call them goobers because they look like definite articles, but they have weirdness going on with the accents over top, which we call goobers. And so that's the trick. If you see a short little word with a rough breathing mark that looks like a definite article, but it's not because the accents are a little bit different. They've got goobers over the top of them, right? Accents that shouldn't be there if it's a definite article. That's your trick. That's your cheat code that this is a relative pronoun. And once you identify that, it should be relatively easy to parse because it looks so similar to the definite article, okay? And so from there then, you just know that it's going to mean who, whom, which, or that, or whose if it's possessive, who, whom, which, that. And you can translate and keep going. Okay. So if that method makes you nervous, if that just seems a little too loosey-goosey, if that cheat code isn't kind of working for you, you always have the option to spend a little time with this paradigm and learn the accents, learn every form, be able to, memorize it perfectly and write it out. That's always an option. And again, if that's the way you're bent, if that's your inclination as a Greek student is just to memorize it perfectly, that's totally fine. You can do that. But I've found most Greek students are able to use that little cheat code of just when you see a word that kind of looks like a definite article, but it has a rough breathing and the accent marks are a little bit different, it tips you off that it's a relative pronoun and you can deal with it on its own terms at that point. Again, you decide how you want to do that, but I think most of you will be able to use that cheat code and it'll really help you move forward, okay? Now, a couple other thoughts. The gender and number of a relative pronoun is determined by its antecedent. It's determined by the word that comes before, okay? So if it's referring to a masculine singular thing, it's going to be masculine singular. If it's talking about a feminine plural antecedent, then it's going to be feminine plural, right? The case is determined by its function in the relative clause, not necessarily in the sentence, right? Because remember, we said that the sentence is one thing. The relative clause is kind of playing by its own grammatical rules when it comes to nominative, dative, accusative, genitive, etc., right? So we need to deal with that relative clause on its own terms, because that relative clause could have another verb in it, it could have another subject, it could have another object, etc. So we just need to look at that relative clause on its own term, and that's where we're going to get the case from, okay? So let me give you an example here. Ha aster han edon en te anatale. Ha'aster means the star, and then notice Han, Adon, which they saw in the east, okay? The star which they saw in the east, talking about the Magi, seeing the star, okay? Now notice ha'aster is in the nominative. It's the main subject of the sentence. We don't have the main verb in this part because this isn't a complete sentence, okay? This is just the nominative subject. The main verb is later. We don't even know what that is. But this relative clause starting with Han Adon, en te anatale, Han is accusative because it's the thing being seen, right? It's receiving the action of Adon, which is the see verb, right? The star which they saw in the east. You might think that Han, which is referring to what, by the way? What is its antecedent? Right, it's ha'aster, it's the star. You might think that Han should be nominative masculine singular because ha'aster is nominative masculine singular, but it's not. It's accusative. Why? Because in the relative clause, it's receiving the action of the verb. Does that make sense? Okay? We're dealing with that relative clause on its own, separate from the rest of the sentence, okay? And commas can help you with that. Commas sort of set relative clauses apart. It can help you with that a little bit too. Well, let's go ahead and review. We learned relative pronouns today, okay? We learned what they are in English, what they are in Greek. We learned that actually they're much more confusing in English than they are in Greek. In Greek, they're pretty straightforward, okay? We just look for the relative clause. We look for a short little word that looks like a definite article but has goobers over the top. It's got some different accents going on, but that can tip us off to what's going on with a relative pronoun. In English, they're more complicated, but we learned those as well. We learned how to use relative pronouns in English, and we learned the proper usage of who and whom, which is widely misunderstood a lot of times for English speakers. And perhaps most importantly, you completed the last chapter of Module 1. That's super exciting. I'm so proud of you. Keep going, guys. We will see in Module 2 where we'll talk about Greek verbs. We'll start digging into that wonderful world of Greek verbs. And guys, that's your ability to read and study and translate the New Testament is about to take a major step forward. And so I'm so excited to see you there. We'll catch you on the other side. God bless.